What's going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome back to the Fantasy Headliners. Kyle coming to you with some Week 14 waiver wire targets. And whether you've locked up a position in the playoffs or you've started your playoffs or you just want to play spoiler, we've got some names for you to consider here before Week 14 waivers process. And let me know in the comments below, did you make the playoffs this year? Have you sealed your fate in the playoffs? Do you have another week left? Do you have a bye? Let us know what you're looking like in the comments below. We want to know how well you've been doing this season. So make sure you comment below and tell us what your record is looking like and whether or not you are headed to the playoffs. Kicking it off, as always, we'll have some quarterback streaming options. We'll have some streaming options for defense. And then, of course, talking running backs, wide receivers you could possibly add, and some tight ends to go with it. So without further ado, let's jump into it. And let's talk about some targets that we're going to be looking at on the waiver wire this week. Typically, this late in the season, you don't have to worry about streaming quarterbacks. We don't have any buys going on right now. However, maybe you play in a 2-quarterback or a super flex league. Maybe you have been playing this season with a lower tier set of quarterbacks, and you just need somebody with some bigger upside here in Week 14. Well, I've got 4 guys for you to take a look at this week. Number 1, Devlin Hodges from Pittsburgh. He is the starter now. Mason Rudolph back to the bench. Hodges is going to be the starter moving forward. He gets to go to Arizona, only 1% owned right now. Arizona has given up 300 passing yards in 6 of their last 7 games and over 400 yards the last 2 weeks. So Hodges hasn't looked bad. He hasn't looked like a quarterback with a ton of upside, but when you play the Arizona Cardinals, there is a potential for a decent amount of upside and low owned. So more than likely, if you need a quarterback, you're going to be able to get your hands on him. Kyle Allen coming in number 2 there on the list at Atlanta, 13% owned. And I know I said it a couple of weeks ago, I'm not doing Kyle Allen anymore. We're going to get away from him. We're not going to work. However, against Atlanta, an option to potentially consider. Atlanta is still giving up the second most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, just over 21 points per game. And Allen has 534 yards and 6 total touchdowns the last 2 games and has only thrown 1 pick. So he's looked a little bit better the last couple of games. Again, maybe a little bit more of a riskier play, just like Hodges. However, a decent upside. He could have some upside this week. Sam Darnold, the third name there on the list, 27% owned. He gets to go against the Miami Dolphins. And I know some of you were let down by his performance last week. Trust me, I was too. I had him in my top 10 quarterbacks last week, getting the Cincinnati Bengals. And for some reason, Cincinnati showed up for one reason or another last week and beat the Jets. However, he gets Miami this week, so maybe we can go ahead and give him a little bit of a pass because even though he was a letdown last week, he wasn't really all that bad. 28 of 48, 239 yards, but he didn't throw any interceptions. So an okay completion percentage, a decent amount of yards. If he could have just found the end zone a couple of times, he would have been a hit last week, but he wasn't. But we're going to give him a little bit more benefit of the doubt this week because since the debacle in the Patriots game where he was seeing ghosts, he's played a lot better. He's 134 for 206 for 1,555 yards. He has 10 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He's been the quarterback 5 since then. Since that mess against New England, he's been the quarterback 5, so he hasn't been all that bad. And Miami's still giving up the 3rd most fantasy points per game. So we're going to give him a pass. We're going to go ahead and run him out there again this week if we're looking for some upside, because I think he does, again this week, have some upside. And the final name on the list there, Ryan Tannehill. Now, I'm not sure what happened. I didn't include him on the show last week because when I looked up his percentages at the time I was doing my research, he was more than 50% owned, and all of a sudden he's down to 21%. So I'm not sure last week if he got dropped a lot, and that's what put him under that percentage, or maybe there was some issues with the website that I was using. However, 21% owned. Ryan Tannehill is still a guy that we need to consider moving forward. He is the quarterback he's the quarterback 6 since taking over as the starter in week 6. He's averaging just over 21 fantasy points per game since taking over as the starter from Marcus Mariota. He also has not thrown an interception since week 9 at Carolina. Oakland has an up and down defense. They are giving up the 4th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. They're giving up over 21 fantasy points per game. Also, Only two 250 or more yard passers at home this season allowed by Oakland. So I definitely think it's a little bit more of a tougher matchup than what some people may assume. They have been a little bit tougher against the pass at home. Now, granted, they haven't played great quarterbacks at home. Matthew Stafford, Patrick Mahomes, two of the guys that have given up over that 250 mark at home against them. We'll see what happens. We'll see what ends up happening. I still like him this week. I think he can still provide solid numbers. I will say maybe his ceiling isn't as high as Sam Darnold, which may or may not be accurate. However, that's just kind of how I'm feeling, because that Oakland defense, they can really show up at any point in time. And again, they've been a little bit tougher to face at home this season. All right, let's jump on over to running backs now. And ladies and gentlemen, it is officially Darwin Thompson season. Okay, maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Maybe it's not officially Darwin Thompson season yet. But for those of you that really like Darwin Thompson to start the season, ladies and gentlemen, it is officially Darwin Thompson season. Celebrate, light some fireworks, confetti, all of that. Okay, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. It might not be officially Darwin Thompson season yet, but we're getting closer, and we're definitely potentially seeing an expanded role for Darwin Thompson this week, which for those of you that liked him in the preseason, which includes me, we're excited about that, because we really thought that this was a guy that could contribute to this offense in a big way this season. But with LeSean McCoy coming in, that just didn't end up happening. Damian Williams is hurt. Darrell Williams is hurt. LeSean McCoy has been up and down this season, both performance and injury-wise. So are they going to increase Darwin Thompson's role? I believe so. I think we could be seeing that. Last week, 11 for 44 and 1 touchdown against Oakland. Good numbers. Not great. Nothing that we're freaking out about, right? That's why it might not be officially Darwin Thompson season yet. However, keep in mind this coming week at New England in week 14. I'm not expecting a ton from Darwin Thompson on the ground. It's going to be tough. However, I want to see the Kansas City Chiefs use Darwin Thompson the same way that Duke Johnson was used last week by the Houston Texans against New England. On Sunday Night Football, Duke Johnson saw a pretty decent load in the passing game. What Deshaun Watson did and what the game plan was for the Texans was to look away from some of those first options being Hopkins and Fuller, and look at some of those secondary options, Fells, Stills, Duke Johnson, and it allowed them to move the ball down the field and even score with Duke Johnson at the beginning of the game. He was a vital role this week to getting that running game, or to getting that passing game moving and getting the offense moving against a New England defense. It's been pretty good this season. Can the Kansas City Chiefs do the same thing with Darwin Thompson this week? If they can, they could be successful. Keep in mind, Duke Johnson, 5 receptions, 54 yards, and a touchdown. Okay, if Darwin Thompson could do that, then not only is he worth a waiver wire pickup, but he's going to be worth a start. Now, I'm not going to say start him by any means whatsoever. Keep an eye on the keep an eye on the start and sit show, and of course the ranking show to get a little bit more info on Darwin Thompson. But for right now, a definite pickup I think you should be targeting in your leagues. Now, Bo Scarborough coming up next, 46% owned. Do not love the matchup this week. However, he continues to be a workhorse. He's averaging 17 yards a carry, or 17 carries, 17 yards a carry, then we're definitely picking him up. 17 carries a game, and his carries have rose each of the last 3 weeks, 14 to 18 to 21. Minnesota is tough against the run, 4th fewest, but Detroit hasn't shied away from establishing the run either. So it's hard to find this type of volume late in the season. So even though this week he might not be efficient with it, it's hard to find a guy that's going to give you potentially 17 to 20 carries a game on the waiver wire this late in the season. Only 46% owned. Definitely a guy that we look at as at least a backup option for a little bit of depth in case you have an injury. Benny Snell at 16%, and this is going to depend on James Conner. Can he get back this week? If he does get back this week, are they really going to utilize him very much? Are they going to work him back slowly? Pittsburgh's playing well right now. If Pittsburgh can get a win this week, then they're looking towards trending into the playoffs potentially. Is it going to happen? I don't know. You got to finish the season strong. However, they want James Conner healthy for any type of run they're going to do. So maybe Benny Snell is the key to keeping him healthy this week. Use Snell a little bit more. The last 2 weeks, weeks, 37 carries, 161 yards, and a touchdown. They're at Arizona in week 14. I'm talking about a lot of Steelers on this episode. Already mentioned Hodges. Now we're talking Benny Snell. I've got a wide receiver for you as well. But this week against Arizona, possible positive game script. Possible positive game script. That's what we want to see. Arizona is also giving up over 25 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. So a good option for you as well. And then Raheem, not quite a most start, although he was a must start this past week. A really good game for him. 14% owned for Mostert. I'm going to tell you as of right now, I am not running to pick up Mostert. Some other people can, but Matt Breida is expected back this coming week. And this is a backfield that is a terror to try and own. Unless there's an injury and somebody's missing and you can get it down to 2 options. If all 3 guys are on the field together and you've got 3 options, it's really hard to pick that one guy that is going to stand out. 146, 1 touchdown last week. Looked really good. But keep an eye on Breida. If for some reason Breida isn't going to play, then maybe we can run with Mostert there. If you have a low waiver priority, maybe potentially add him. I'm not running to add him. I don't want to spend a bunch of fab or a high waiver priority on him because if Breida plays, then I don't think Mostert is going to be a guy that we're going to actually end up playing this week. I find it interesting with my first wide receiver, Deebo Samuel, and it was brought up in the comments in last week's video, how I could potentially put Samuel in there when he was such highly owned. So I went to several different fantasy websites, and his ownership percentage varies greatly, which is one of the only players I've seen this with this year. On ESPN, he's only 41% owned, which again, for this show, we're looking at under 50% owned, so that would include him here. However, on Yahoo, he's 63% owned, and on CBS, he's over 70% owned. There's a couple of other websites I looked into as well where he's anywhere around that 45 to 55 range. How we've not picked him up yet is beyond me. He's got a touchdown in back-to-back games now, and since week 9 in half PPR formats, he's the wide receiver 11. He is a wide receiver 1 type player since week 9. He's the clear wide receiver 1 in that offense, and the Saints are allowing over 37 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, 10th most in the National Football League. So Deebo Samuel, we have to be picking him up. We got to get that ownership percentage even higher. But probably one of my main ads this week, and a guy that I really want to get my hands on in as much areas as possible, is James Washington, 22% owned. He's the wide receiver 9 since week 9 in half PPR format. So he's outdoing Deebo Samuel by just a little bit. He's got a touchdown in 3 of his last 4 games. He's got more than 90 receiving yards in 3 of his last 4 games. And he's been averaging at least 5 targets per game since week 5. So the volume's been there. And over the last 3 games, the production has been there as well. And of course, he's Devlin Hodges' hunting buddy. They're going to go out again hunting some ducks this week while they're getting ready for week 14. So what else could you want? He's his quarterback's favorite wide receiver on and off the field. You might as well invest in James Washington because he's been worth a start basically every week over the last 3 weeks. Anthony Miller, 10% owned from Chicago. There was a lot of names I could have brought up this week. I'll throw a few more out there for you. But Anthony Miller as well, the last 3 weeks, he's averaged 11 targets per game over the last 3 weeks. That's insane. That's a lot of targets, a lot of potential volume. Do you trust Mitchell Trubisky? I don't. But if he's going to keep throwing the ball his way, could be worth a crapshoot. Averaging 90 yards a game, again, over the last 3 weeks as well. So he's even been playing a big performance on Thanksgiving where he had 11 receptions, 140 receiving yards. And if Tyler Gabriel is out, Miller gets even better at that point. So if Gabriel were to miss another week, Anthony Miller is looking like a guy that I can lock in as a flex play. Robbie Anderson, 46% owned over the last 2 weeks, 15 targets, 11 receptions, 187 yards. He has 2 touchdowns in 2 of the last 3 weeks, or a touchdown each of those weeks. So 2 touchdowns total in the last 3 weeks. And Miami next, 38 fantasy points per game, 6th most to opposing wide receivers. And this has been, if Jamison Crowder does well, Robbie Anderson doesn't do well. If Robbie Anderson doesn't do well, Jamison Crowder doesn't do well. In this game, I'll bet on Robbie Anderson to get you a big play touchdown. However, keep in mind, other wide receivers to keep an eye on as well. Cole Beasley had a great game this past week. Russell Gage, is he a guy that's going to see more volume if Julio Jones were to miss another week? Allen Lazard, he is the wide receiver 2 right now for Aaron Rodgers. Allen Lazard is another guy to keep your eye on. And Zach Pascal as well. There's some injuries again brewing there. When will T.Y. Hilton be back? Again, there's hope that he'll be back this week. Chester Rogers is hurt. Eric Ebron is gone. So Zach Pascal could end up seeing a good amount of workload. Any of these guys really are potentially really good ads for you prior to week 14. All right, bring it in, ladies and gentlemen, because the tight end whisperer has a few options for you in week 14. Coming up, number 1, Jack Doyle. He's just not a streaming option. Jack Doyle is a must-add at the tight end position, a position that's been awful. Let's face it, tight end has not been a good position this year. We've seen some good play. We've seen some guys break out, but overall, it's been awful. At one point, there was only like 6 guys averaging double-digit points per week at the tight end position in half PPR formats. Jack Doyle doesn't have to worry about Eric Ebron anymore. Okay, he's not just a streaming option. He's a plug-and-play option. No Ebron. There's no Ebron, okay? When will Hilton be available? When will Hilton be 100%? Again, Chester Rogers is done now. Jack Doyle, a big part of that offense. 6 receptions, 73 yards, and a touchdown last week. He also has touchdowns in 3 of his last 5 weeks. Get Jack Doyle if you need help at tight end right now. Mike Gesicki, and just let me tell you right now, 10% owned, but because I mentioned him, he's going to suck this week. So if you pick him up, don't play him, because if I mention him, he sucks. Now that I've mentioned him, he's not going to do well this week. That's just the way it's been so far this season. But he has at least 6 targets a game over the last 5 weeks, and he's got touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. But let me keep this in mind for you. Without his touchdowns the last 2 weeks, he's not a startable player. He has to score. He only has 1 game this season in which he didn't score a touchdown, and he was a startable option. And again, here, we're talking startable option, not even 10 points. We're talking a tight end 1, which is anywhere from about 7 to 8 points at times. So again, he hasn't been good unless he scores. So if you pick him up and play him, you got to hope for him to score a touchdown. I personally don't want to risk it. Vance McDonald, Pittsburgh. Now, I broke a little bit of a rule here. 59% owned. Some of you are still sticking with him. Good for you. I gave up a while ago. However, life, death, taxes, and opposing tight ends torching the Arizona Cardinals, and that's who the Steelers have this week. If you can get your hands on Vance McDonald, he's in your lineup. If you have Vance McDonald, he's in your lineup. Vance McDonald, for me, is going to be a top 5 play this week. Not nearly as bold as a call as my Ben Watson call that didn't work out was a couple of weeks ago. But again, opposing tight ends continued to burn the Arizona Cardinals. How could Vance McDonald not have a good week this week? If he has a horrible week this week and you play him, it is not because I'm forcing you into playing him. It's because he is literally one of the best matchups on the slate for the tight end position, and we are going off the numbers we have seen. Even Tyler Higbee had over 100 yards and 7 receptions with a touchdown last week. Arizona cannot stop opposing tight ends. We are going to roll with him. And Tyler Higbee, as I mentioned, they're only 0.6% owned. Nobody rolled with him last week. I told you on the tight end episode that if Gerald Everett didn't play, go get Tyler Higbee and put him in your lineup. A lot of you must not have done it, or this number would be higher, or you just play on different platforms. Whatever it may be, if you got Tyler Higbee into your lineup, congratulations. Good week for you. Is Everett going to be out again? We got to keep an eye on that. And then also, they're allowing Seattle, who they get this week, is allowing the second most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Again, last week, Higbee, 7 receptions, 107 yards, 1 touchdown. Again, it's only if Everett doesn't play. If Everett does play, we're not going to go with it. If Everett is out, Higbee's going to be a guy that's definitely a tight end 1 option. And keep an eye on Jacob Hollister and Kyle Rudolph. This episode is dropping prior to Monday Night Football. Both of those guys under 50% owned. You can get both of those guys, especially if one of them has a really big week this week. You could end up getting one of them, although I would shoot for Hollister before I would go with Rudolph. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's wrap it up here. Talking about some defenses that we can stream here in Week 14. Starting off with the Jets, 34% owned, and I know they let us down last week, okay? I know I told some of you to play them. Wasn't a great game. Wasn't an awful game. Still got you 3 to 5 points, depending on your format. Wasn't nearly as good as I had anticipated, though. However, they get Miami this week. Miami allows the second most fantasy points per game to opposing defenses that are going against them, okay? So typically, anybody playing against Miami, that defense is going to perform pretty well. A dud last week, but double-digit fantasy points the 3 weeks prior. Okay, so at least 10 fantasy points for the Jets defense the 3 weeks prior to that. They just didn't create turnovers last week, and that's a big thing. They didn't create turnovers. However, here we go. They're currently the defensive 5 on the season, so they're the 5th highest scoring defense. They have 16 sacks from week 9 to week 11. 16 sacks over the course of 3 weeks. Miami is giving up the most sacks, or the second most sacks this season to opposing defenses. Could be a really good week for the Jets. The Colts at 42%. This is high risk, high reward. They can end up having multiple turnovers from Jameis Winston. They could also give up 3 to 4 touchdowns and 400 yards. So it could really go either way with the Colts. If you absolutely are dying for an option, this is a team that's high risk, high reward. You could get that reward from them pretty easy. However, it could also burn up in your face. So be careful doing that. The Packers only 24% owned. Another kind of risky option this week, but they did create 3 turnovers against the Giants last week and could potentially do the same thing against Haskins this week. Opposing defenses that play Washington are scoring just about 9 fantasy points per game right now. So again, a little bit of a risk because the Packers defense has been up and down this season. From a fantasy standpoint, they haven't been great. They've been decent in terms of just real life football, but in fantasy, they haven't been creating a lot of production. Can they get Haskins to turn over the ball this week? That's going to be the key. If they can, then they should give you a solid fantasy output this week as well. There you have it, Headliner Nation. Quick and to the point. A lot of really good names for you to consider before putting in your waiver priorities this week. So go do that. Enjoy some Monday Night Football. Have yourself a great week 14. More content to come this week. Again, in the comments below, let us know how your team is going. Have you sealed your fantasy football playoff fate? Did it already start? Are you out of the playoffs this season and you're just looking to play spoiler in a loser's bracket or stay out of the toilet bowl? Whatever it may be, okay? Let us know what you are doing or how you did this season and what you're looking at going forward. And of course, as always, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell notifications, so anytime we go live or drop an episode, you'll know about it. And then also questions, leave those in the comments below. And of course, hit the like button on the video. Always appreciate that. Headliner Nation, have a good week. We'll talk to you on the next episode. Have a good one.